The Rambam, in his magna opus, known as Yad HaChazaka, the mighty hand, in which he has 14 books, that he explains the 613 mitzvos of the Torah. There he says in the introduction to the Minyan HaMitzvos, when he begins to enumerate and categorize the 613 commandments, he says that not only will I discuss the 613 commandments of the Torah, but also I will discuss, says the Rambam, the 7 laws of the rabbis. And one of these laws are the laws of Eruvin that we will talk about tonight. What is the laws of Eruvin? So the Rambam says in the laws of Yom Tov, in the laws of the holidays, chapter 6, law 1 and 2, he says like this: let's say the holiday of Pesach, for example, falls out on Thursday and Friday. So you have Thursday and Friday holiday, and then Shabbos is Shabbos. So the question is, on the Yom Tov, on the holiday itself, you're allowed to cook. However, how do you cook for the Shabbos? On Shabbos, you're not allowed to cook. On Yom Tov, you are allowed to cook. How can you cook for Shabbos? Because you're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to the weekday. And the basic reason is that the rabbis were concerned that instead of spending the holiday with your family and spending the holiday with your synagogue in prayer and Torah study, one will spend the holiday, because they are not working, preparing all their frozen TV dinners for the rest of the year. And therefore the rabbi said, you're not allowed to cook on Yom Tov for the weekday. But what about for Shabbos? Came along the rabbis and they said we have to make an Eruv. And that is before Yom Tov begins. In other words, Wednesday afternoon, you have to prepare a challah and a piece of gefilte fish, or a challah and a piece of chicken, and that will be the Eruv. And from this Eruv you will continue to cook Friday morning and afternoon for the Shabbos. What is the meaning of this Eruv? What's the concept behind this Eruv? So the Rambam says this Eruv is like a heker. Heker means it's a reminder. It's a reminder that really we should not be cooking from Yom Tov to the day after Yom Tov. But being that I started before Yom Tov to cook, I recognize that I'm only cooking before Yom Tov for the Shabbos. And this heker, this reminder, allows me to recognize the distinction between cooking on Yom Tov for Shabbos in contrast to cooking from Yom Tov to the weekday. This is the reason that Rambam gives. And in truth, the Rambam, like everything else he says, is based on a source. What's the source? The source is the Gemara. The Gemara in the Tractate of Beah, page 15b, brings a pasuk. And the pasuk is from the portion of Beshalach. The portion that we read this week, it says over there in the portion of Beshalach, in chapter number 16, verse number 23. Eis asher toifu eifu, ve'eis asher tuvashlu bashelu, which means that which you already cooked before Yom Tov, you may continue cooking on Yom Tov for the sake of Shabbos. And that which you already baked before Yom Tov, you can now continue to bake on Yom Tov for the sake of Shabbos. From here the rabbis learn that this verse is an asmachta, which means is a support, a hint from the Torah to the rabbinic mitzvah of the law of Erevin. This is what the Rambam says. And this is what the Gemara says. But in truth, there's another reason in the Gemara as well. And these two reasons are ultimately brought down in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, in the laws of Yom Tif. And there in chapter 527, law number 2, the Rambam says these two reasons. And he simplifies it. He says, number 1, why do we make an Eidiv when Yom Tov falls out to be on the eve of Shabbos? Number 1, the first reason is Laharbois b'chvod Yom Tov, to add to the honor of Yom Tov. That's one reason. The second reason is Laharbois b'chvod Shabbos, to increase in the honor of Shabbos. What does that mean? So the first answer is to increase in the honor of Yom Tov is as follows. That if I know I'm not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, surely one may not cook from Yom Tov to the weekday. And therefore, I'm not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos unless I prepare the Eidiv before Yom Tov begins. And we explained earlier, the Eidiv simply means to take a piece of challah, a challah roll, and a piece of cooked chicken or roasted chicken, and we prepare this Eidiv, and we hold it all the way through Shabbos. If we for some reason eat up that piece of chicken and that challah roll before Friday, before Shabbos, I cannot cook Friday for Shabbos. So this challah roll and chicken has to go all the way through Shabbos, and according to many opinions, all the way through to the third meal of Shabbos. Only at the third meal of Shabbos, at Shalosh Shudas, can I eat up this challah roll and this piece of chicken. So the first answer is that why do we make the Eidiv? To increase in the honor of Yom Tov. Don't make Yom Tov cheap. And therefore don't cook from Yom Tov to the weekday, and don't even cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. The second answer is Laharbois b'chvod Shabbos. The second reason why we make the Eidiv is to increase in the honor of Shabbos. We are concerned that because we had 2 days of Yom Tif, of holiday before Shabbos, we'll eat up all the food in the house on Yom Tif, and there'll be no food left for Shabbos. And in truth, the Rambam says that on Yom Tif there's a greater mitzvah to invite guests into your home even than Shabbos. So you think, look, there's a mitzvah to have guests. I'll prepare food for Yom Tif, and hopefully I'll have something left over for Shabbos. But if I have too many guests, I won't have anything left over for Shabbos. So therefore comes the mitzvah of Eidiv. Laharbois b'chvod Shabbos, to add to the honor of Shabbos, and tells me, you know, you have to make sure before even cooking for Yom Tif, already you prepared food for Shabbos. So this adds to the dignity and to the holiness of Shabbos. And through this we'll have enough food for Shabbos and for Yom Tov. The Rebbe categorizes these two concepts very simply. He says one is a negative and one is a positive. According to the first answer, to increase in the holiday of Yom Tif, that's why we make the Eidiv. We are dealing here with a negative, and that is, why do I make the Eidiv? So that I do not cook on Yom Tif for the weekday. And I do not cook on Yom Tif for Shabbos. It's a negative. The second answer is a positive. And that is, why do I prepare the Eidiv before Yom Tif? Laharbois b'chvod Shabbos. To increase in the honor of Shabbos. To make sure that there is food for Shabbos. One is a negative, one is a positive. And in truth, this concept of negative and positive, the Rebbe also applies to Shabbos and to Passover. as we spoke about in previous classes, that on Shabbos we have Shamar v'Zochar. You have to honor the Shabbos by remembering the Shabbos, and Shamar, not to violate the Shabbos. And in the concept of Shabbos, of the tranquility of Shabbos, there are two levels, a negative and a positive, says the Rebbe. The negative is that we cease from working. We no longer work. Friday afternoon, we light the candles, we cease from working. That's the negative. But then there's a greater aspect to Shabbos, and that is the positive. That as I enter into Shabbos, I now acquire a level of true rest, a level of tranquility. That's a positive. And that is accomplished through Torah study, and through prayer, and through having family meals, etc. Similarly on Pesach, says the Rebbe, there's also a negative and there's a positive. On Passover, we are to remember going out of Egypt. And in truth, this is a mitzvah every day of our life. Every day, a Jew is supposed to remember going out of Egypt. What does it mean to go out of Egypt? A negative and a positive. Number one, God took us out of the house of bondage, and therefore we are no longer slaves. That's the negative. The positive, now that God took us out of Egypt, we are now free people. Two aspects. You could not be a slave, but not be free either. As the famous saying goes, you can take a Jew out of Egypt, but not take Egypt out of the Jew. And therefore, there are two aspects in Pesach. One is becoming non-slave, leaving Egypt. And number two, to truly be a free person, and that is by the fact that we acquire the Torah, we learn the Torah and fulfill God's commandments. And just like God is infinite and God is free, we become free and we become infinite. So what do these two concepts mean here? When it comes to the Eidiv, when it comes to preparing the food before Yom Tiv, we have two concepts, a negative and a positive. What is the concept of Eidiv really all about? Even though it's a rabbinic law, every rabbinic law has its roots in Torah law. What is the Torah law of Eidiv Tafshilin? The Torah law of Eidiv Tafshilin is really the concept of Ahavas Yisrael, to love your fellow man as yourself. We see this by the preparation of Eidiv Tafshilin. What do we say? We make a bracha before Yom Tov begins, that this is the mitzvah of Eidiv Tafshilin, and we say that this Eidiv will not only be for me to be able to cook and to bake, but this Eidiv will be for the entire city, that anyone in the city who needs to cook and bake can rely on my Eidiv. In other words, you are uniting the entire community together, which is really the meaning of Eidiv. Eidiv means to mix and to unite everyone as one. And because of this concern, I make sure that I have enough food, not only for Yom Tiv, but also for Shabbos. And this concept is underscored with a beautiful story of Rabbi Leivik, who was the father of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe told this story that his father not only received smicha from great Hasidic masters, but he also received his rabbinic ordination from famous world teachers and Rosh Hashivas. One of the great rabbis that he went to receive his smicha was Rabbi Chaim of Brisk, Rabbi Chaim Brisker. When he came to Rabbi Chaim Brisker saw that he was truly a brilliant man, and he kept on asking him many questions. And the way it was in those days when you went for smicha, you would sit in the shtibel, in the synagogue of Rabbi Chaim Brisker, and any time a question would come to his court, Rabbi Chaim would turn to the potential rabbi and say, "Nu, what do you say? How would you answer this question?" And one day, on the holiday of Sukkot, it was Shabbos, And people ran into the synagogue of Rabbi Chaim of Briske. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, the Rebbe's father, was sitting there as well. And he told Rabbi Chaim, we have a problem. And that is, we have a chotzer, we have a yard that unites a number of houses together, and we have a sukkah in that yard. But we forgot to make an Erev Chatzeres. That's another type of Erev. And that is, if a few houses share one courtyard, you cannot carry from the house into the courtyard. You have to make an Erev, and that is each family participates by giving a little piece of challah, and you bring it together as one, and you say it's really one big family. Again, Erev, we unite all the families together, and now the courtyard is not a public domain, it's a private domain. And because it's a private domain, we're allowed to go from the house to the courtyard, and from the courtyard to someone else's house, and bring food and drink back and forth on Shabbos. So now you have a sukkah in this courtyard on the holiday of Sukkot, and it's Shabbos. And the problem is they forgot to make an Erev Chatzeres to unite all the houses together for the courtyard. So we're going to eat on Sukkot. You can't eat in the house, you have to eat in the sukkah. But the problem is you can't carry the food from the house into the sukkah because we forgot to make the Erev. So this was the question they posed before the great Rabbi Chaim of Brisk. Rabbi Chaim turns to Rabbi Levi and says, "No, how do you paskin?" And instantaneously he responded, "The sukkah is ma'ariv. The sukkah itself unites all the families together." And Rabbi Chaim listened, and he said, "Yes, we will follow your psak, we will follow your conclusion, and that will be the halacha. You can use the sukkah to bring the food because the sukkah itself unites everybody together. As the Talmud says, it is fitting for all the Jews to sit in one sukkah. So the mere fact that you built a sukkah means that you are one family, and therefore you can bring your food and eat in the sukkah on this holiday." The Rebbe also went on to say that Rab Chaim, seeing how brilliant Rab Leivik was, says, Rab Leivik, such a good head, and what do you stuff your head with? He was implying that in addition to studying Talmud, he was also studying Chassidus and Kabbalah. And the Rebbe smiled and said it again, Rab Leivik, Hazagut cup, you have such a good head, and yet what are you filling your head with? So, this concept of Erev, which is a rabbinic law, amplifies the concept of Torah law, which is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. How do you truly love your fellow man as yourself? Not only when they come to you and they say, I need something right now, I need a charity, I need tzedakah, I need help, do you help the person? But even before the holiday, you create an Erev that unites the entire community together, and you prepare food for the next 3 days, for the first 2 days of Yom Tov, and for Shabbos, that if people come to the house, there'll be enough food for them to eat. Now, one more detail. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch brings 2 reasons for why we have Erev. As we said earlier, one is a negative and one is a positive. It's interesting that the Gemara in Be'ah also brings 2 reasons, but the Gemara brings it in the reverse. First the positive, then the negative. The Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says first the negative, then the positive. So what do we derive from this? And I believe the answer is as follows. When it comes to Ahavas Yisrael, when it comes to loving a fellow Jew as yourself, there are 2 levels. There's the negative and the positive. The negative is the minimal. This is something every single Jew must do. And therefore the Rambam also brings down this reason. And that is, one thing for sure, do not create divisiveness. Do not break the Jewish people. Do not hurt another person. That's the least you could do for the sake of Avas Yisrael. Number two, that's not enough. Not only is it not enough, but you have to go beyond that to the next level and be positive. And to go out of your way to bring unity amongst one Jew and another. And to think a few days in advance, what's going to happen in a few days from now? How could I make someone else's life even better? As Baal Shem Tov says, that a soul comes down to this world for 70, 80 years just to do one favor for another Jew. So this is the mitzvah of Eidiv, which is not a Torah law but a rabbinic law. For the rabbis came along to amplify and expound upon the words of the Torah. And they say that how do you truly love your fellow man as yourself? By making an Eidiv, by uniting and mixing up all the Jews together as one. And then we will be Zoicha, we will merit to have this great sukkah that God will enwrap all the Jewish people together with the coming of Mashiach speedily in our days.